That was one of the best patch stories I've ever played in Final Fantasy XIV. Square Enix needed a home run, and they knocked it out of the park. Dawntrail has concluded, or at least the main story. And now we move on to potentially familiar horizons. Hello everyone. I am Jmulls. We have a lot to talk about when it concerns not just the present of Final Fantasy XIV, but also the future. There is a lot to talk about when it comes to 7.3, so let's start with my overall impressions of what works with this patch, because I think there's a lot of strengths. The biggest one being the pacing. It is rock solid from beginning to end, and in a lot of ways is Final Fantasy going back to what works here. Having those big, emotionally charged, climactic feeling moments, and then weaved between those more down-to-earth, slower-paced, character-filled scenes, allowing the emotional ramifications of what just happened to sink in and to allow these characters to just breathe. I think there's one section in the laboratories that you could argue is a bit too slow, but I would argue that it's slow for a reason because they're trying to experiment with including new gameplay features into the MSQ, which seems to be where they're heading for here. They introduced the new tutorial system with this patch, and throughout the MSQ, had quite a few sections where you're doing very rudimentary puzzles, but they break up the flow of the game. It really does feel like Final Fantasy XIV responding to the feedback it's been getting for a while at this point, that the MSQ can just feel like a cutscene simulator, with little bits of rudimentary gameplay here and there. They really try to spice things up here. Not all of them necessarily worked, right? Like the puzzles weren't like anything world class. I'm not playing Portal over here or anything. But some circuit-based puzzles, find the right key card, can you use deductive reasoning to find the right clues, or search in the right locations to get it done faster because you can logic it out. Again, nothing too like deep or complicated here. It's like, where do you think the key card would be? In the office drawer or the garbage bin? And don't get me wrong, it's still a Final Fantasy XIV patch at the end of it all. There are a lot of cutscenes and there'll be a lot of reading. But I can see what they're trying to do here, which I think will be a running theme for the remainder of Dawntrail. Them testing a bunch of new ways to implement existing ideas and seeing how people respond to new ways to execute on conveying certain things to the player. I think one of the other biggest strengths this patch had was its overall tone. It was really dark. Yeah, you know how 7.0 and 7.1 to a lesser degree felt very childish in the way that it conveyed its story, as if they were targeting an even younger demographic than previously? I think they're doing a far better job of targeting the demographics that flocked to this game before with this patch. The tone was way darker. There was a lot more blood. Like, there's a lot of blood in this patch, like more than you think there'd be. Heck, one of the first visuals you have in this patch is a child pretty much crying over the bloodied body of his mother, who's not dead, but it's still a striking visual to start the patch off. And the ways they're able to, like, weave in these horror elements in various scenes throughout this patch, God, I eat it up every day of the week. I love it when Final Fantasy XIV experiments and dips its toe or just fully swan dives into the horror side of things. And I think the overall tone and atmosphere that 7.3 had allows me to say I really like Calix as a villain. It works so well for the type of guy he is. And everything that I liked about Calix in 7.2 is amplified pretty much tenfold here. I think he is an extremely compelling character now. And in a lot of the same ways that I thought 7.2 was a massive step up from 0.0 and 0.1, I think 0.3 is another step up from even 0.2. Considering where we came from with 7.0 and 7.1, the fact that Dawntrail's overall story was able to end off on such a high note, with a story that is this high quality, I think that really does speak to the overall increase in the writing quality. The fact they got me this emotionally invested, the fact I had this much fun just playing Final Fantasy XIV as a story right now, the fact they actually got me to kind of like Wu Clement as a character. Consider that for a moment. I think they got the balance of screen time down in a much better ratio here than they did in previous versions of the Dawntrail story with 0.0 and 0.1, continuing that trend from 0.2. I think the use of music in this patch in particular is Dawntrail's best iteration of incorporating music into the storytelling. The music in this patch freaking slaps. Calyx's theme is so dang good for the tone it's trying to set. It is haunting, it is macabre in a way, in all the right ways as well. So I think in terms of, do they still have their stuff? Does Final Fantasy XIV and the current writers, whoever they have on their team right now, as of this moment, do they still have a bag that they can go in deep? Yes, 1000%. This patch in particular even got me to retroactively like mainly the Alexandrian portions of .0 even more. Not necessarily because what came in .0 was so good or anything like that. I still have massive issues with it, but it's just the way they were able to up the quality overall with .3. It was such a good ride. I am fully on board with whatever they have cooking up for the future. The dialogue and the writing felt way more in line with the style and the quality that I fell in love with Final Fantasy XIV 4 back all those years ago. There is a clear vision for where they want to take this story going into the future, but I think they did an excellent job of closing the book on Dawntrail, to the point that I'm not gonna look back on Dawntrail with as bitter of a taste as I thought I was going to. They ended it off on such a good high note, in my opinion. And to talk about the rest of this story and why I like it and the various elements of it, now we have to get into the spoiler side of things. And to kick off our spoiler section of today's video, let's talk about how they played it really safe this go around. Okay, so I am not including the meanwhile scene we had at the very end. The bulk of the story, what they chose to be the conclusion of Dawntrail, in my opinion, was very safe. And in a lot of ways, is a textbook Final Fantasy XIV story and overall narrative when you're just looking at the plot points and the beats going from one to the other. Calyx is the bad guy, we learn more about him, he monologues at us, we go to him for the final confrontation, it looks pretty dark, almost as if he's going to win, but we manage to pull it out at the very end with the power of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn and whoever we're with at that current moment. We manage to win, and all's well that ends well. We get a happy ending. In terms of broad brushstrokes, that is roughly what happens in this patch. It's just so well executed. And after .0 and .1, yes, you showed me a really good patch with .2, but you needed good payoff for those things in .2 because that patch was largely build-up. You needed good payoff. .3 was that good payoff. It was showing me that you can tell a really cohesive and interesting story still in Final Fantasy XIV. With great characters, great moments, and some absolutely badass, hype-filled moments. The Warrior of Light actually does things in cutscenes. At the very end, don't get me wrong, but there's even a moment at the very end that got me hyped through the roof. We'll get to that. But like, the overall plot beats, they did play it very safe. There was no, like, major character death besides, like, Geodude at the very beginning, but the way they frame things, the way they allow these characters to breathe and to just be characters living in a world where they don't feel as if they're just spouting exposition. The dialogue feels far more natural, and again, in line with the overall quality Final Fantasy XIV used to have. I don't mind them ending Dawntrail with a very safe story that's not like, we're gonna kill a bunch of main characters or anything like that. I don't mind a very safe story right here because this was them proving themselves again. This was them saying, hey, we still got it. They picked themselves off the floor after falling and said, you know what, we're gonna keep going on. We may have stumbled, but we can get back up again. I'm glad they didn't do something stupid like try to kill Wu Klamacha because a lot of people online don't like her, or kill Sphene for whatever reason, just to like showcase we can kill major characters. We don't need that necessarily right now. I just need to be showed that the chef can still cook a delicious burger, a delicious steak dinner. I don't need a bunch of risks. I don't need a bunch of experimental things going on right now. Just show me you still have your stuff. They showed me they still have their stuff. It was a very well executed Final Fantasy XIV story. Calyx is an incredible villain. I really ended up liking him. The dialogue was far better written than what it was in .0. The pacing was also far better than back in .0. The music and the music choices and when they played the music was far better here. And let's talk about my favorite part of the entire patch, the climax. So we do the dungeon, which was really cool, by the way, and we have a final showdown with Calyx. He summons in Necron from Final Fantasy IX. We have a really cool boss fight against Necron. It's awesome. I love it. And then we have that moment. The moment where Final Fantasy XIV told me we can still be hype and we are willing to do what is needed here. Because, oh my god, this was absolute cinema. The way they had the callback to the Sphene that Wuklamot shouted out during the Sphene boss fight 0.0, but it's Sphene saying Wuklamot this time, giving Wook a lightning axe as well with a really cool combination attack. And the way they played with your expectations from 0.0, where it's like, oh, they're gonna have Wuklamot be the hero again because it's Dawntrail. Okay, sure. But the way they frame that scene, like Wook blooding her hands and pretty much taking herself out of commission to break the shield to allow us to appear behind her falling body to deliver the final KO with an attack animation that is unique. I don't know if it's based on the job you have or if it's based on the role you have. But all I know is that I went up in the air with my Dark Knight sword and I windmill dunked that thing onto the core. And it was awesome. And that was after me parrying the boss to protect everyone else. It was so cool. It was so well choreographed. That can just be said for the entire patch, by the way. The cinematography and the camera work is so dang good. And the way you see Calyx's like calm demeanor start to shatter as it sets in that he failed, it's so dang good. I love that entire climax. I think 0.3 in a lot of ways is a good representation of that old trope of make it seem as hopeless and dark as humanly possible, and then when the heroes are able to find a way to win the day, it'll make it feel all the sweeter. It's a very well executed version of that storytelling cliche, which is what I think this patch needed to do, because it started off on such a strong note with the death of Geode, and them confirming that like pretty obvious theory from before that Calyx was turning people into dust. And the lore reason for that is essentially the mechanical soldiers are sucking up the ether from the people, and when the body is completely dried of ether, they turn into like dust, which really, again, as I pointed out back in 0.2, changes how you view the beginning of the 0.2 dungeon. But the way we see Geode getting overwhelmed by the mechanical soldiers, and then when we find him, all we see are 4 mechanical soldiers looking over a pile of dust as a canister is being filled. And the voice acting in this patch is genuinely really dang good, and the way the characters reacted to the death of Geodude was really heartwarming, and I think it helped make those characters far more likable. I already liked Shale, but it helped make the other characters like Nostalgia actual characters I cared about, instead of just, named NPC number 54. Glad you're here. I think the reason the climax in 0.3 works so well is because they had such good build-up with 0.2 and most of 0.3. They were willing to show the villains be villainous. They were willing to show the horrors of what was happening, of turning people into dust, the fear of death becoming palpable. And with good dialogue and good writing and good pacing, it didn't feel childish. It didn't feel watered down or anything like that. It felt raw in all the right ways, and I found it supremely enjoyable, and I think all that build-up made that climax feel all the better. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about Sphene.
I am not their queen.
Okay, let's talk about the big character for the patch, Sphene, who became one of my favorites after 7.2, and in 7.3, yeah, she's still one of my favorites. She's just a really likable and well-written character, and I really like how she builds off the character of Endless Fiend from 0.0. And yeah, let's talk about what they ended up doing with the character, having her become the new Queen of Alexandria alongside the Nepo baby, Gulja. Much like the cliffhanger ending that we'll talk about later, I need to see what comes next. I don't think it's right to necessarily talk about whether or not this was the right decision for the character until I see what the story they want to tell is and how engaging and enjoyable to experience it is. I will say as of right now, I am 50-50 on the idea of her becoming the Queen of Alexandria again. But I do think within this patch, they did a good job of at least trying to justify why that would happen. When she gave the Natsuki Subaru style speech there at the end in the big climax, and with everything that happened, I do think it's a decision that makes a lot of sense. However, you may know that one of my wish list things, one of the things I predicted before this patch, is that Sphene was going to be a long-term character for the story. With the way they were setting her up in 7.2, with the way they were developing her to become a trust character by relearning magic, which she actually does relearn here. Like, you can have it in the trust for the dungeon and for the trial, which is absolutely what I did, by the way. So if they ever want to use her again, they have that set up so they can just bring her back in, and gameplay-wise it would work. But I think myself and quite a few other people were expecting that she might become a main traveling companion for the Warrior of Light going into the future, and her being the Queen of Alexandria does feel as if it prevents that from happening since she has responsibilities in Alexandria. I think they wrote the character in such a way to where they can kind of do whatever at this point, because with the way the story is going right now, with the key to interdimensional fusion being such a prevalent doohickey in the lore, alongside all the various research facilities of preservation within Solution 9, I think it's fair to say that Solution 9 and Alexandria will be a little bit of a home base for us. So if we do end up going on a story arc that involves a lot of shard hopping, I wouldn't be surprised to see Alexandria be at like the center of all of that. Kind of like how Sharlayan was near the center of a story like Endwalker. It really does depend upon where they want to take this story into the future. Are we going to stay on Hydaelyn? Are we going to stay on Etheirys and go to various different locations? Or are we going shard hopping? Because with that post-credit scene that we're going to get into, it does feel as if there will be some kind of shard hopping in the immediate future. I think either way, whether or not Sphene becomes a long-term character or they're gonna go the Aymeric route with her, and we will rarely ever see her again, I am kind of satisfied with what they did with that character. We didn't have her for long, just in point 2 and point 3 so far, but she had a really satisfying story arc, and I'm glad she got the happy ending. And I think with the way they framed the story in point 3, it makes a lot of sense thematically that this is the direction they went with, where they really focused in on the importance of remembering what came before, but embracing the idea of using that for comfort to go forward into the future, having Queen Sphene, you know, the one from all the way back then, represent all those older memories, but herself also walking into the future alongside a new Alexandria. Thematically, it makes a lot of sense. I am still of the opinion that I think we need to introduce new long-term characters for the Warrior of Light as a traveling companion, or as like a new party for us, not just reusing the Scions of the Seventh Dawn all the freaking time, but if they are able to maintain the same level of writing quality and characterization they just showed me in point 2 and point 3, I don't see why they can't introduce new characters from here on out to fulfill that role. Or we do go shard hopping and they do what I've been kind of thinking they're going to do for a while and have us form a group of characters representing each of the different shards. So we'll get Zero and Golbez back for the 13th, Sphene for probably the 9th, and other characters to fill the role for the other shards we end up going to. There seems to be some large conspiracy going on here, and in order to properly address that, let's talk about Calyx and let's talk about the Ascian.
I am not their queen.
Okay, so that post-credit scene is easily going to be the most controversial and polarizing element of the entire story for point 3. Far and away, and I don't think it's going to be close. Personally speaking, I have no strong opinion about it because I am firmly in the camp that, hey, okay, we are going in a new direction for the story, new in quotation marks. I need to see where they take this, what they end up doing with it, and who that character ends up being and what their story is before I can make any judgment about whether or not it's too early to pull the Ascian card. Because it could just be a dude that likes to cosplay as an Ascian, or he's just a black mage and we just don't know at this point. Or he's just an Ascian, but he's like one cog of many and he's not like the main bad guy. He's just like one of the henchmen of the bad guy, or like one of the members of a council or something. We have a new group called Winterer. We don't know who they are, we don't know what they want, and we don't know what they're doing. We just know that Calyx is a part of that group, and he has to report, or the totally not an Ascian guy has to report back Calyx's failure to that group. and rewatching the cutscene for 7.3, near the end especially, they start to utilize a lot of ice and like thawing imagery. This feels intentional, especially with the group name being Winter. Like how we had the expansions in the Heidelin and Zodiac arc be like thematically tied to times of day, maybe we're now doing seasons. Because they even talked about near the end of the patch that the hearts of the people of Alexandria were starting to thaw and they were able to restart their time again. I think this is going to be imagery and an overall theme that is going to go into the future. I'm not gonna say it's too early to pull the Ascian card. We don't even know who this dude's name is, and we don't even know what he sounds like, what he thinks, or what he feels like, because all we saw were like his feet. We know next to nothing right now, and I don't think it's fair to judge an entire plot beat based on so little information that we have right now. It's just them gently nudging us in the direction of where this story is going to go, but we don't know what shape or form it's going to go in. I can understand why some people would be hesitant about them reintroducing Ascians into the story. We know some are still out there. I think it entirely depends upon how they tell this story and what the story ends up being. When it comes to Calyx, they are seemingly going in the direction of having Calyx be a long-term character. I think in terms of making Calyx a memorable and interesting villain, that is the right call and the right play. He would have felt a little bit too much like a throwaway villain if he had died permanently here, which could have been fine, but they clearly have larger plans for this character of Calyx. He had his Asahi moment where we thought he was very calm and calculated, and then in the post-credit scene, Calyx, and even like closer to the end when we started to whoop his ass, the mask began to fall from him, and in the post-credit scene, we really start to see him become unhinged and allow his emotions to come out. He even had like a little PTSD episode about the Warrior of Light. I think they established a few key things with 7.3. The Warrior of Light is the MC. They're not just going to be a background character like they were in Point Zero. Even Yoshi P in a recent interview we talked about on the channel talked about that as well. It seems our long-term villain group are going to be a group known as Winter. We still need to learn more about them because we know absolutely nothing about them right now. Calyx is still around, and I wouldn't be surprised if the concept of the Endless in some shape or form continues going into the future. Because Calyx in that post-credit scene alluded to the idea that he expedited his plans because other people, like probably in the group of Winter, were already seeing success. I need to think about it more to really like hammer down my thoughts and opinions about what has happened here and where the story can go into the future. But I think I am completely open to whatever they want to tell here because they showed me they can tell a extremely compelling story here with 7.3. I am willing to hear them out with whatever direction they end up taking this because I was so thoroughly impressed with 7.3. I am glad that they're keeping Calyx as seemingly a long-term villain. I think he's interesting and I really like the vibe he has right now. And I think they can do a lot of interesting things with that character. But for the whole post-credit scene, I have no real strong opinions. I need to see more. I need to see what the direction is, where they take this story, and what they do with it.
I am not their queen.
Patch 7.3 was what I wanted it to be in a lot of ways. I wanted them to end Dawntrail on a high note, and I think they managed to do that. I think it was really well written, well executed. I loved the music choices. I loved the moments that happened in it. I loved the overall tone, how dark it was willing to get at times, and the fact they were willing to show a lot. It got dark, it got macabre, but it balanced that out with great moments of characterization and big climactic hell yeah moments. I think they ended Dawntrail off on like the best possible note they could have, or at least right up there. They pulled me back in with 7.2. I thought that was really good, and I think 7.3 is a step above even that. I am fully invested in what's going on. I am fully invested in finding out what happens next. I am here for whatever wild and wacky ride they have cooking up. And here's where you come in. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions on patch 7.3 Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you feel about it? I would love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. And what was your favorite moment of the patch? And if you want to be up to date for Final Fantasy XIV, you should leave a like and subscribe. Follow me on TikTok, Twitch, and Twitter, Jmulls G. I have a Discord in the description down below. Needless to say, I am optimistic about the future of Final Fantasy XIV, now more than ever. And if you want to hear my reasons why before the patch even happened, you should check out this video right here. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.